All right, welcome back everyone to our fun author craft series. Today we have a special treat and we have a pair of siblings who are both writers coming to speak with us. So we have Jeff Deaver, who's an international best-selling author, and his work has been selling more than 50 million copies worldwide, and his sister, Julie Reese Deaver, who is a young adult author. Her book, Say Goodnight, Gracie, for example, has been won many, many awards and has been in a 20th anniversary reprint edition. So we're so thankful that both of you could be with us here today.
Well, good to talk to you, Maria. And hello to everyone out there in the audience.
Yes, thank you.
Hi.
All right, so our first question. In one of your interviews, Jeff, you mentioned that thanks to your parents, the Deavers are avid readers. What drew each of you to your respective genres?
Well, our parents had quite an interesting rule in our household growing up, and that we could read any book we could find, any book, whether it was a children's book, of course, or a young adult book, although there was not a huge young adult market in the 1950s, or an adult sort of book, adult novel. But there were some movies we were not allowed to see, which was a little ironic because back then, basically every movie was rated G or PG, but some books were a touch risque. But nonetheless, I was 7 or 8 years old and being encouraged to read whatever I could because they considered reading a good thing. So I was reading James Bond novels, John D. MacDonald novels, other popular fiction, and it just hooked me. I just love the idea of a genre story, and that's where I headed. I knew I wanted to be a writer from the time I was like 10 or 11 years old, but because I was encouraged to read.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, Julie, do you have any advice, or do either of you have any advice to students looking to be more engaged readers or to develop a reading habit?
You know, I think I'd encourage them to read what they enjoy. I think in school we have to do so much required reading that some kids don't enjoy reading. I know for Jeff, when we talk to some of his fans, they'll say, I got kind of turned off of reading, but when your books rekindled my interest in reading because they were, you know, they're entertaining and they're fun. And so I would read what they enjoy. I think that would spark an interest in more reading, you know.
Oh, I would absolutely echo that. I remember, and Julie, you probably remember I think it was on Main Street. There was the hobby store in Glen Ellen, Illinois, where we grew up. And it also had a book rack where I would buy my James Bond novels for 25 cents, which told you
that's right.
when they were. But they'd also have like literary books there. And I remember once I thought I should expand my horizons.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something like Ulysses or James Joyce or anything like that, but it was something that was way above my years. And I was very proud at the checkout that I was buying this book.
Yeah, that's right.
I never read. So
right.
Read what you enjoy. That should be what it's all about.
That's right. I remember buying my Nancy Drew books based on the cover artwork because, you know, they had just reissued them and updated them, and she had a very mod look about her. So that's a good way to choose a book, you know, based on the outfit of the character on the cover, you know.
Well, that's how I choose my wine bottles. So I guess
well, that would be like me too.
All right. For our next question, both of you mentioned on your websites that you enjoy working in professions other than writing, such as being a musician and artist. Do you see an influence in your writing from these other fields? And are there any hobbies or professions you'd still like to try?
Julie, you want to take that?
I think there is, yes, I think there is a similarity. The work process is sort of the same. I mean, in terms of getting an idea and getting it down on paper, even though they're completely different things, I think they kind of dovetail nicely. And hobbies that I might want to try in the future, you know, I'm really just content writing, and I still do artwork, but that is dependent on the strength of my glasses, because as I get older, my eyes aren't as good. So I used to do very detailed work for the New Yorker, but my work isn't as detailed now. So I don't do as much of it as I used to, you know.
Well, I think any creative work, and that includes genre fiction that I write, has to be the most emotionally engaging it can be. You don't want to read a book and have the response, "Oh, that was interesting." You want to read a book and say, "Oh my God, I survived that book. It just grabbed me." And so I use as a model for trying to achieve that emotional engagement music, actually classical music. Beethoven, my favorite romantic era composer, would he would not create 5 adagio movements one right after another, because then you'd be bored. He would not have 5 andante movements, because then that would lose the impact. So he starts with a prologue, a theme. Then he has alternating movements leading to a big crescendo. The da 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 da, and then there's a coda, like a soft reconciliation, and that's how I structure my novels.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I can't listen to music when I'm writing because it throws my rhythm off. It's a peculiar thing. I think you can, though. You listen to music when you write, don't you?
I listen to some. It has to be. There have to be no lyrics, of course, and
right.
It tends to be soft. Well, I can't say softer jazz. It has to be non-experimental jazz. I mean, I mentioned Beethoven. I don't listen to. He's not a jazz musician, but I don't listen to. Strindberg or who was it? Shostakovich. The kind of more brash.
Right.
But I do listen to. I think like Chet Baker, Dave Brubeck, people like that, who I can kind of keep in the background. So that I do like that. But while I'm editing, while I'm creating, no, I have to have complete silence.
Yeah. There's something about it's like trying to sing 2 songs at the same time if you are listening to music when you write. I mean, for me, it's just they fight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
they fight each other.
Yeah, that's interesting to know, because I will say, and some of my students are out there watching these videos, I have them listen to Dave Brubeck Take 5 as they're doing their drafts. So that's helpful to know that other people.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
All right. So for our next question, I noticed that you link to each other's websites, and we were wondering how much you discuss your books as you're working on them. Do you ever send drafts to each other? Do you serve as sounding boards for each other during the writing process? And have you ever considered collaborating on a project together?
Yeah. Julie,
I'm laughing because Jeff is he's such a brilliant writer, and his plots I've seen his outline board. I mean, they are so intricate, way above my pay grade, but but yes, he has read some of my drafts and given me some really good suggestions. So
and Julie is my first editor for everything I write, and she's an incredible editor and makes substantive comments, as well as catching the typos that I have looked at 100 times, and I just don't catch them. As far as collaborating, it would be great fun. However, we write in very different genres. Julie's a much more character driven author. I say soulful writer. I'm a very mechanical, plot driven author. And so I think our sensibilities as editors help each other. But in terms of actually creating a project, I think that would probably not be too productive.
Yeah.
Was it ever something that you did in childhood, or just out of curiosity?
No, I don't think we ever wrote anything, did we?
No. I would shoot Julie's Barbie dolls with my BB gun to do research, but
they'd be worth a lot of money now.
I know, yeah, sadly. Not with the indentation on their foreheads, though.
He dispatched my Barbies, so I don't have them anymore. No, but we both started writing what I would say seriously very young. We were very young when we did that.
So following up a little bit on the research question, I'm assuming you don't shoot Barbies anymore. But From reading about your process, you say that you spend many months researching your book and you write very detailed outlines to keep track of the twists and turns. So we were sort of curious, Jeff, is there a book that proved particularly challenging? And is there one that you really enjoyed this location-specific research more than others?
Sure. And if I could back up for just a minute, because I know there are many writers out there listening, and I do teach courses in writing. And first of all, I'll say there's nothing more subjective than this wonderful business. And what works for you works for you. Some people outline and some people don't. The world is divided into the plotters and the pantsers, as in seat of the pants. And it's simply what you're comfortable with. Now, I'm a plotter. I write very fast-paced, multi-plotted stories that require me to follow Joyce Carol Oates' advice. And I think she said something, I'm paraphrasing now, but you cannot write the first sentence of a work, a story, or a novel until you know what the last sentence is. And that just works for me. And I recommend to my students that I do 130, 140 page outlines before I begin a novel. Well, that's that's unnecessary. I just feel comfortable doing that. If you have a rough idea of where you're going, I would strongly recommend that. But in answer to your, so I had my little professor hat on there for a moment, but in answer to your question, I think the only book that was challenging, daunting with research was my book, Garden of Beasts, set in Berlin in 1936. And it took me 2 years, 2 years to research. But maybe Julie could talk about being more of she's not really an outliner. And so maybe you could talk about, your process of.
I do want to mention too the October list, your book that starts at the end and ends at the start, which I think
it's a novel, a thriller I wrote in reverse, which took a lot of research. You're right. That probably was more challenging. Good point.
I mean, I think it's just the most amazing plot, and sort of inspired, I might ask, on a Seinfeld episode, correct?
Yes. Martin Amis and Seinfeld. So there's a combination for you.
Yeah, it's very good. But yeah, I don't outline because when I'm writing, things happen through dialogue that take the plot in one direction or another, things I couldn't possibly have known until I started writing. So, I mean, it's to me like sitting in California and trying to figure out where to turn left if I'm driving across the country. Until I get there, I don't know what it's going to be like, and so,
Well, George R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, of course, said he doesn't outline at all, never has for that incredible series.
That's amazing. But for your type of book, where you have to know where to plant clues and reveal things, you must know where you're going. I mean, you have to.
And it's interesting you use the word plant, because he said writing a book is like being a gardener, and he plants the seed, and then as it grows, you kind of nurture it and you maybe trim so it's out of the shade and you water it and so forth. But it's a discovery, just what you were describing. It's a process of discovery.
Yeah. I think your way's better.
Well, I'll tell you this. I will say outlining is more efficient, because you may start with an idea that you think is the best idea for a book in the world, and then write 300 pages and realize it's not.
Yeah, that's true.
And so if you do the outline first, you'll be able to see, maybe this is a book that should not be written, because
you can see where it's garbage sooner than.
Yeah, well, haven't we all read a book that should not have been written? We don't want to admit it, but
yeah, that's true. That's true.
All right. So my next question is for Julie. You mentioned on your website that you try to respond to all the fan mail received from your readers. What's the best or most meaningful comment you've ever received from a fan about your books?
Well, when I wrote my first novel, I did not intend it to be a book on grief and recovery, but I've heard from a lot of readers, it's used in grief counseling, and I've heard from a lot of readers who say it helped them through a very dark time, which is, that's so meaningful, but I didn't plan it that way. So that was, very exciting. And another thing that happened that was not as serious, but kind of fun, when our grandmother was still living, my first book had just been published, and we all grew up in the Chicago area. And I got a fan mail letter from a middle school student who lived on the same street where she grew up. And I mentioned that when I wrote back. And so she went and took pictures of my grandmother's house. This was pre-internet. So, and so she was able to see what her house looked like, growing up. So that was kind of a fun, just a fun little thing that happened. So.
Wow, that's really cool. All right, our next question is for Jeff. Jeff, you mentioned in your Q&A on your website that you need to think about relationships and writing characters with psychological depth. So what makes a good protagonist in a thriller, and how is a crime protagonist different from one in another genre?
I heard something very interesting a few years ago. I think it was on NPR about, I think it was a neurolinguist or a scientist who had said that the part of our brain that creates emotional connection with real living, breathing people, our siblings, for instance, our parents, our spouses, and our enemies too, because not all in life is happy. And if you have an negative emotional attachment or a negative emotional reaction to somebody, that can still be very intense. The part of the brain that does that with real people is identical to the part of the brain that does that with fictional characters. And up until then, I had largely been a purely plot-driven author and filled in my characters later. I colored them in. In other words, I outlined them and then kind of colored them in. But since that, I've made a conscious effort to, while not neglecting the plot, fill in the depth of the characters much more so that the folks will fall in love with them. And my new character, Coulter Shaw, who made his debut in Silicon Valley, in San Jose is mentioned at length in the book, The Never Game. I made much more of an effort to create him and the people he interacts with as real characters. And that by real character, what do I mean? Heroic, I want good guys and bad guys, and I want my heroes to be good guys. They have flaws though, in the same way that the bad guys maybe have some good sides, because that's the way life really is. And if we can do that in our fiction, I think we'll be able to create that bond between, I don't care about myself and the connecting with the readers. I want my characters to connect with the readers.
Yeah, it's a great way of looking at it. I have a question for Julie. You mentioned in your biography that you studied at Chicago's Second City Theater and that it's influenced your writing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that experience has had in terms of your work?
Well, one thing it did was to sharpen my ear for writing dialogue, because we were essentially all writers, standing up, making it up as we go along. And that really helped me. But I realized too that all of my books are first person, and it is just sort of like acting on paper. So I'm not looking at all the other characters and what they're thinking. And I'm sure I got that from Second City, and being truthful in the moment and all that kind of highfalutin actor talk, but it was very helpful. Mostly, I think, for the for dialogue,
And nobody writes better dialogue than my sister. End of story.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's Jeff and I have a joke that to me, the plot is like the bus you take to get to Disneyland, and Disneyland is writing the dialogue. And right. It's just a necessary evil, that nasty old plot. That if I could just write dialogue, I mean, if it were easier to get a play produced, I would be doing that. But I think that's like an impossible, way to make a living writing.
Yeah, I mean, my follow-up question to that was, since you live in Pacific Grove, were you influenced at all by some of the literary history in the area around you?
Jeff, didn't you speak at the Steinbeck Center when you were out here?
Yeah, we did there was an event there. It had a number of authors, and I myself read Steinbeck a long time ago, of course, more literary than genre, although that that distinction I have some trouble with, because Shakespeare was a genre writer of the time, and now he's a literary writer. I think there's good storytelling and bad storytelling, but I loved love Steinbeck, but I can't say he was a huge influence. Although the Steinbeck Center, I would recommend anybody to go there. It's a fascinating look at his world.
Well, when we were in high school, we had and we both happened to have the same teacher, creative writing teacher. We actually, I don't know if you remember this, Jeff, but one of our textbooks was written by John Steinbeck's short story teacher. And I think her name was like Edith Miralese or something. I still have the book somewhere. I was looking for it. And he wrote the foreword to it. And so I guess in that way we were influenced by Steinbeck. So
well, and then I also have to say that when I'm out to visit Julie, which I will be pretty soon, I live on the East Coast, we eat and drink on Cannery Row. So if that counts.
Didn't he live in PG?
He did. Yeah, there's a house. I have to go back and look up the address, but
I think it's on. I think I remember it's on Erdley. I don't know, but you know, it's funny. We don't hear that much about him here, and we live here. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he wrote a lot about the area, but
yeah.
He also spent some time on the East Coast as well.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going into our final question, and I loved this quote that you put on your website, Jeff. The best way to learn about writing is to study the work of other writers you admire. So this question I have for both of you is, what do you hope writers are learning from a study of your own work?
Well, I would hope what I referred to before, that it is important to bring emotional engagement to the story, that you excite readers, get them involved. And I don't mean with crime, car chases, because relationships, if you're writing about relationships, conflict in relationships, that's just as valid, probably more valid, because very few of us have experience with crime and so forth. I think, so there's that, the emotional, have in mind, you want an emotional connection. Always remember the tools of the trade, grammar, syntax, punctuation, absolutely vital. A comma can make all the difference in the world between clarity or not. And I guess I would say, remember that your goal is not about yourself. Your goal is to give the reader something he or she wants. And I analogize that to a pilot, and you know, she's flying along a big, super big jumbo jet, and she looks ahead and sees a terrible thunderstorm, and she thinks, yeah, I don't care, I fly through thunderstorms all the time. Or she sees a beautiful sunset and she thinks, what a beautiful sunset, I don't care, I'm flying the airplane. It's our job to remain detached and give our readers a wonderful wonderful time. So my couple cents worth.
That's good. That's good. I like that. I just hope my books aren't assigned as homework, because I want kids I want them to like my books, and I don't want them to have to think, oh God, I've got to read that book for a book report or something like that. But yeah, I never think of the audience when I'm writing. I am really writing for something that I would like to read, you know, and I want them to be pleased with it. But I write inside out, not outside in, you know, thinking of who's going to be reading it, you know.
All right. Well, thank you both for offering your time and your advice today for our audience. And on behalf of the San Jose State Writing Center, thanks again for participating in this craft series.
Oh, thanks. It was a wonderful experience. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.